it's Luna. Welcome to day 6 of Moth Eaten Reel's 31 Days of Horror 2024. Today we're going into the ups, the downs, and the phantasmagoric in-betweens of 1988's The Lady in White from director Frank LaLoggia. Let's talk about it. First of all, I'm happy to report that this one is actually a bit of a palate cleanser from the last day's movies. It's something that, as usual, I went into it not really knowing anything at all about it, and it was something that was actually very family movie in the end. We had to look this up because there was some confusion about the age ratings. Apparently it was rated R in America, so something 18 plus, you know? And oh no, this must be why it bombed as well, is another thing to mention, because it really was giving Disney Channel original movie. It was fun, it was light-hearted, apart from the parts that weren't. We'll get to those. So, in essence, it is a writer returning to his hometown and standing in front of graves that will of course spawn the story, and we spend the movie in a flashback of his childhood to the 60s. One Halloween night, the town of Willowbrook is changed forever when he's locked in a cloakroom and witnesses the murder of a young girl and is almost murdered himself. As I say, immediately going into it, we have this very peppy vibes. I think that even with the downs, if you just love 80s aesthetic, you will enjoy this movie for the cinematography. The oranges and the golds are really shimmery and glittery. They really pop. There is that vivid haziness to a lot of scenes, and the way that the music interacts with those scenes is something that... So, an aside where I complain about a lot of modern films, you can kind of listen to soundtracks without them relating to the scenes they're in at all, and that's fine. Of course it's fine. It means that I get to listen to video game soundtracks and movie soundtracks just on my downtime. But there is a charm that I do miss about then a lot of older media that is then aimed at families, in my experience, where it's goofy, you know, someone falls over and it is accompanied with a synchronized clash of drums, you know, that kind of cartoon synchronization with the music. Interestingly, director Frank LaLoggia also did the music himself. So I think another thing when I start complaining about this movie is that it is, like Mandy, another one that I mostly just admire that the director had a vision and stuck to it. I found out that The Lady in White is then an actual urban legend in New York about a woman who lost her daughter, and so she is a ghost who is always looking for her daughter. That's her place in the urban legend. This is something I found out afterwards, otherwise I might have then had more expectations going into this movie of what it would be about. The opening title was then something that was a little bit spine-chilling, you know, just a solo little girl's voice singing a song as then smoke and the black screen and this curly font of Lady in White appears, so it felt quite a straight-laced horror. But everything after that for the next 25 minutes felt very hocus pocus, Halloween Town. It was then lots of Halloween decorations. That's immediately going to add that kind of cheesiness to it, I think. The kids are going to school in their Halloween costumes. Our main character, Frankie, who is initially introduced to us as a writer, as I say, going back to his hometown. And he has this boisterous Italian family. He's got a brother who is brotherly in that antagonistic way. It's something that I thought was quite cute to link us to who he was, because in the opening, when he is driven back to his hometown by the cab driver, he asks him to stop inside a cemetery, and the two graves that he stands in front of, mother and daughter, is another thing that really, if I'd known the urban legend of Lady in White, I think that there it is immediately. You know what it's referencing, you know likely something about what's about to occur. But we only get a view of his brown eyes. It felt like a very M. Night Shyamalan kind of close-up that was a little bit overly dramatic, but it meant that then once we're introduced to his childhood, his brother knocks him over and is being a douchebag, frankly. He's like, you have beautiful brown eyes. And it lets us know who he is in the past. The granddad has something going on where he is smoking more than he should, and so he drops a cigarette on himself and is very. I don't know if anyone's gonna be upset by the Mario Luigi presentation of this. I doubt it. The director himself is Italian American, so I think he's safe from other Italian Americans. But he's like, I'm on fire. It's very cartoonish, but again, it then sets that mood that makes me feel very confused as to why this was rated R in America. But it also presents this idyllic life he leads. You know, he's safe, he's got his family, we're around him, and he goes to school. But then we find out that not all of his family is there. His mum has died recently. His teacher, before she goes off after school, she is being inappropriate with Frankie. Not to him, about his dad, who is obviously a recent widow. She's like, oh, you can remind your dad that he can talk to me at any time. I'm in the phone book. And it is this drawn out, quite cringy from then my perspective scene where she's like, do you need me to write that down? My name in the phone book? Because your dad can talk to me at any time and any time. Girl, stop. Inappropriate. But again, getting across that kind of tone where it's light-hearted, it's fun, it's campy, and I love that. It's not what I went into it expecting, but I love that. As I say, Hocus Pocus, Halloween Town, delicious, corny decoms in New England, yum yum yum. When young Frankie is at school, he tells this story to the class that he wrote himself as well, and oh, that was another one that made me cringe a little. It shouldn't, because you know when kids start writing stories, of course they're a little bit flippin' inept, you know, they've just got a grasp on how to say words at all, but then listening to this kid's story for a solid flippin' 7 minutes or so, and the cheesiness around it, I'm just easy to make cringe, I think. His story, if you care, is about some seaweed monster wreaking havoc in London, but the end... He's got the grip on the spooky cliffhanger already because he's like, by some miracle, the sea beast swam back into the sea and was defeated. And the class does a little clap and a cheer. And he's just like, unless the monster had an egg. But that's impossible. Or is it? It's cute. It's cute. Again, it is giving Disney. During this, I bring this whole story up. One of the kids in school, he's in a little devil outfit, and he is a little tyke. He immediately marks himself as the school bully because, you know, 80s American school bullies always have the darndest lines. I always think I can never imagine being bullied by this kind of kid, because when he first describes the monster, he pipes up in his little devil uniform. For some reason everyone laughs at what he said, which was, did he brush his teeth with Crest to prevent cavities? Brutal takedown, absolutely devastating. However, his reign of terror does continue to an actually effective end. Once the bell rings, he grabs his friend, his little cohort, and they go to the cloakroom, and they immediately have this vendetta against Frankie for some reason, and they dig through his bag, and they pull out a cap, and they say, oh, he'll be really upset about this, and they chuck it at the top of the cloakroom stools, I guess, and so once he's outside, once the teacher's gone away with her bad flirting, they say to him that to make him notice that his cap's gone because, you know, it's only October, it's not that cold yet, he hasn't noticed. So they're on the grass having like a casual chat, and even with like the snide little like, I really liked your story, Frankie. It was giving Mean Girls the way that they were bullying him. But then they point out like, oh, it's getting cold soon. Have you got a hat? And so little Frankie, who is so naive, bless him, this is another character trait they pick out quite early, is that he's actually very naive, refers to Devil Kid and his cohort as his friends, even though they're obviously bullies. And so he rifles through like, yeah, my dad got me a little ski cap. Oh no, where's it gone? Oh no, Frankie, sorry about your hat. And so they say, oh, maybe I've left it in the cloakroom. And they go back, and then these two, they go to lock him in the cloakroom. And it's a Friday, and so this is going to be something that causes him to be stuck in the cloakroom for the entire weekend. So we've bumped up, we've surpassed the Mean Girls pettiness, and we've actually gone somewhere. And I do love the set design. So of course he's then climbed on top of the stool, found his hat after being locked in there, and then we have this delicious little orange segment window. I really liked that with the lighting. And outside of their school, there's a cemetery. I had this at my primary school, so I can relate to the terror of being able to just see all of these graves at that fragile age when you've been reading too much Goosebumps thinking, what if the zombies just pop out during maths one day? And with that, okay, this is where the nostalgia hits, with that kind of 80s, early 90s haziness, glow and shimmer, the visuals of him leaning against this window with his hand there outside with the cemetery, that was nice. I liked that a lot. This is where we begin on scenes that start to make the movie not feel very clean, in my opinion. Definitely, again, I love that the director then did not have to deal with any kind of corporate meddling, so he just got to make his thing. But we have then this long dream sequence, which then does get across the atmosphere, that haziness, not just because of the cinematography, but that it's a dream and a connection to his mother. And the dream is then her funeral, and it's almost like a flashback within a flashback, where then after the funeral, which has a lot of candles. And so he wakes up from this dream crying, and that's when the ghost girl comes into the room. She floats through the door. She's stuck in her own time loop, reenacting the night she died. As another one that I feel is then part of the kind of disappointing missed potential from a movie that was flippin' rated R. Like, I'm gonna keep bringing that up because it's just such a family movie, and I don't know why it has such a big old age rating like this. So a thing that I personally picked up on about the things that she is saying as we see her ghost, of course, but then have no visual for the person who is clearly leading her into the cloakroom. But it's the lines that she says have this creepy factor to them. Who knows what they say, but she's like, of course, you got me this dress. I know your favourite song too. And it's a Bill Crosby romance song. At this point, I'm thinking, nonce. But this guy comes in, is like, who are you? What are you doing here? And then proceeds to strangle him. This is where we really get some fun 80s visual effects in this near-death experience where he's been strangled to unconsciousness. He's flying through the sky. He can see his family looking for him, and he's going through this kind of sun that makes me think of James Bond. And then he sees the two guys who played the trick on him, and they're crying in front of his gravestone. But the gravestone says, it's okay, don't worry, because they have his birth year and not a death year. So he's in that limbo. He's not dead yet. In this vision, though, he does then see the little girl, that ghost, and it's really pretty. It's so, so pretty. I can definitely recommend this film to anyone who just wants to find those specific 80s hazy, dreamy, glowy, glittery scenes, because the little girl is then sat by her gravestone in this vision, and there is glittery confetti coming down, and this ethereal, synthy choir in the background. And she hands him flowers and says, will you help me find my mummy? During this little conversation between the two of them, Dad performs some magical CPR, because of course CPR doesn't actually work like that. But magical movie CPR is performed by his father, who's found him in the cloakroom with the police. And so they're asking him, did you see who did this to you? Did you see his face? Who did this to you? And we enter the beginning of the next majorly unnecessary plot thread. The only other person in the school at that time they find is the janitor, who is a black man. Now, another thing about the horrible bullies that I just don't understand why Frankie as a little boy is like, they're my friends. I'm like, they're not, babe. When have they ever done anything friendly to you? During the conversation before they're like, where's your hat, bro? They drop the hard R. They drop the hard R and oh no, I forgot this like unnecessary thread too because we never see it again. Sorry. Backtrack a second. When he's telling his story to the class, there's a girl there who's being very like, wow, this is the best story I've ever heard actually. And once class is clearing out and they're the only two people in there with the teacher, it's clearly played as a cutesy puppy love scene, which is like, I really liked your story. But anyway, we never see her again for the rest of the movie, which takes place over about 5 months, so we really should have. Sorry, back to the racism. These horrible little sprogs, they drop the hard R, referring to the janitor, and then I bring up the film's Trudy because they mention that she has Brillo pad hair. So what a fun way to remind us that we're in the 60s. The arrest of Willie the janitor also informs us, the viewers, that actually there's been a murderer around for about a decade who has murdered 11 children. When he is recovering in bed, Frankie sees a newspaper where he then recognizes the picture of the ghost girl that he saw. And it's when they go to church, and of course the congregation is all very happy that Frankie didn't die. We have to hear the squalling of this woman Agnes, who, at this point, I shouldn't be so derogatory about her, because one of her children was one of the murdered children. The family of Willie are also at church, because it's a small town, everyone's at church. If you're not at church, where are you? Willie's family have to sheepishly quickly leave the church as Agnes is screaming, I spit on you and I spit on your murdering husband. This is when we get to find out that Frankie's dad is an ally. So that's nice. What's not so nice in the long run is that I don't think that this woman gets a single line in this film. And I'm not keen, to put it mildly, on this entire kind of subplot that centers bigotry when the film doesn't actually want to go into it. At some point in the run-up of Frankie's investigation into the ghost girl and the mysterious lady in white at the cliffside, he does overhear a conversation between his dad and the chief of police, who says that there isn't sufficient evidence, but specifically says the line, "This case has been making monkeys of us for years. Harold Williams is the perfect scapegoat. He's black." And so again, this specific, the use of the word scapegoat, I'm like, surely this is going to go somewhere. We're going to have some kind of like To Kill a Mockingbird message going on at least, which still would have been off to me because it did not connect in any way to the murder of the girl and then her mother. You'll never guess what happens to Willie. But we'll get to that. First we have another adorable scene where the little girl, Melissa, we know her name now because of course her face was among the murdered in the newspaper. She is then hanging around in Frankie's room doing her little ghosty twirls, and she at this point is clearly then not in that limbo of having to reenact her death. She's messing around with his comics. She blows on the window to create vapor so she can draw a little heart. Again, a whole gold mine for adorable aesthetic images. And the twinkle music is back. It was so sweet. Like, the atmosphere when it was good was glowing. But then we do get a little flash to the window of then this much older woman looking in, and I would say this shot was actually scary. I wonder if media predisposed me at some point to be frightened of old women with unruly hair. The old woman is just looking in and she's not doing anything. Wait a fucking minute. Sorry, I've just come to this realization that actually it is slightly creepier than I thought it was. Okay, so jumping ahead, right? There is the little girl, her mother, and an old woman. The old woman is not her mother. The old woman is the mother's sister. I actually don't know why she would be at the window. Anyway, the shot is creepy. The context is apparently a bit creepier than I thought it was. So little Frankie wants to die again, apparently, because he goes back to the cloakroom completely on his own and checks out the grate that the camera focused on earlier when the ghost was reenacting her death. And we did get then some sound indicating what her killer was up to. We get his footsteps, big and heavy. Again, the atmosphere, fantastic. And it goes towards this grate, and so he goes to investigate it, where he finds it chock full of evidence. Good for him, I think, because he is in fact in a movie and is of course going to be far more competent than the police. That moment I mentioned where the police says he's the perfect scapegoat, he's black, is something that Frankie overhears when he goes to his dad's work to tell him about the evidence that he's found. Before that can happen, he runs into his Uncle Phil. Not his real uncle, but a best friend that the dad has. It's another scene that happens that then switches it back to making it feel like a more mature movie. When Frankie is recovering with his little neck brace, he and Phil are talking, and the tone of that was then a lot more drama heavy, as I say, a more mature feeling. The important thing to know is that Phil and his dad are besties. And so when he runs into Phil, he talks to him about all of the evidence that he's found. In essence, it means that then Frankie doesn't bother telling his dad, and we get a cut back to the house where his brother Gino, who I haven't mentioned in a while, he was mostly at the front of the movie, causing little bits of mischief. In amongst all of these flash to home scenes, there are just so many goofy shenanigans with the grandparents. They don't sum up to anything. Nothing that they do then matters later. But I've got to mention them again when I talk about the fact that the tone did not really then merit any kind of R rating. This could have been such a clean movie, man. So they go and investigate this house. I can't quite remember why. They say there's an old piano teacher who lived there who tried to light herself on fire but didn't succeed. They say the house is abandoned now, and naive little Frankie goes there with the two bullies who locked him in the cloakroom. I don't know why he thinks that they're his friends. But it almost is friendly. It's something that I was almost rooting for. It's a good trope when actually the bullies turn around and are actually friends to the protagonist. Something hits as a connection that they can have, and then they're allies. And they're fun allies because they're little shits. And that's the case here. They have this little crocodile that they jump scare each other with as they're going through the house, pranks and fun. And at some point, when he's scared, this baby crocodile flies up into the air. And friends, after Candyman, then Benny's video, I was looking at the credits to see that no animals were harmed. I didn't see it. This little baby crocodile has a couple of scenes where he's poking out of this little doll's house, the little windows, because they find a little girl's room. And so seeing this baby crocodile playing with the items in there is very cute. And more praise for the music and the way that it gets that cartoonish tone in there. It's very comedic. It's a very cute scene. I would like it more if I knew the crocodile was safe. And it's this fun stuff, like exploring the house of his bullies and then encountering the ghost. She floats downstairs with her arms outstretched and scares the wits out of them. It all feels very kind of Spielberg and Stephen King. And I really like those elements. It made it a really fun movie, apart from the parts that were not fun. And it's such a shame that this whole scene didn't kind of happen earlier, because another thing that I found about this film is it kind of drags. The runtime is 1 hour 57 in total, and so that's probably, at a generous guess, 10 minutes for credits, so 1 hour 47 for this movie. This whole exploration of the house, that doesn't happen until about 1 hour and 16 minutes in. We should be wrapping up about now for the tone that it has. But we didn't. He runs out of the house after being scared by this ghost, but gathering more information about what's going on, and he runs into his brother in the woods, who is there to prank him again. But he takes it all very seriously, what he says to him, because he's then seen this evidence too. And this is where I think I have another criticism that hurts more because I have a solution to it. You know, sometimes you have a criticism of things and it's just that the vibes are off, and so you kind of almost don't want to go on about it because you're like, well, I don't really have more to say, it's just that I didn't like it. This I don't like because I see a solution. They should have picked, I think, whether they wanted his two bullies to then be his allies, or for his goofy brother, who is also in that level of menace that he could have been that kind of ally to him as he investigates. They should have picked one or the other for who he goes through the movie with. We then get the scene where they don't have evidence to hold Willie, and so he gets in the car, ready to be driven home, and Agnes is there, your one from the church. She's like, no, I want to say sorry to him. And so it had me back on that train of, oh, it's a Disney Channel original movie, this is when they apologise and we are all reassured as an audience that bigotry is dying. Doesn't matter, because she's got a little handkerchief with her, and then she takes that off and goes, this is for my Richie, her murdered son, and shoots him in the head. He is dead now. And it irritates me so much that that's the conclusion to that story. That's it. We never see anything else from any of those characters in the rest of the movie ever again. And I want to be good faith about it, you know? I want it to have some kind of message that matches the rest of the movie, but for me it just didn't, because of this friendly family tone that the rest of it has. And then just a wild racism subplot that, sure, is chronologically appropriate within the universe, but why is it in this movie? And I find that after this headshot scene, the rest of the movie starts to feel a little bit lazy to me. Where we've been meandering for maybe the past, well, half an hour, it then feels very, oh, quick, we better wrap this all up. But this doesn't meet safety standards roller coaster begins with Frankie taking an archery lesson from his Uncle Phil. And at some point during this archery lesson, all of the pieces fall into place for Frankie. He starts locking down the cars, like, no, get away, Uncle Phil. And oh my god, it's goofy as well. Again, why is the tone still goofy for something that is then getting very dramatic, very climactic for this 18 movie? Because he rises up and starts shaking and vibrating like a little hive of bees. He's climbing through, and then Frankie escapes. He runs to the house on the cliffs, the site of the hauntings and the place where he last saw the ghost woman. He is knocked down by Phil, who does seem determined to kill him this time, despite him being his best friend's son, and he also says this line about how, if your dad knew, I could never live with myself. So poor baby Frankie is struggling and screaming, and then Phil's about to get him got, but then the ghost seems suddenly corporeal because she gets behind him and stabs him. Frankie's knocked unconscious, and then when he wakes up, he is in this fire hazard of a room. Very beautiful set. It's the little girl's room, and it's got all of these candles around it. Little Frankie lives, and then the ghost is there to explain all. She is not a ghost. She was the sister of the mother of the girl who was murdered. This poor lonely woman by the cliffs, her entire family, her sister and her niece. I think if not for all of the other happenings, I would have let out a couple of little tears. And so she explains all this because I suppose she really just needed somebody to talk to, as we all do, and says, don't worry about him. He's gone now. He can't hurt you anymore. she gets stabbed from behind and knocks over all of these fire hazard candles. So back to full-on graphic violence as Frankie is then running away and he ends up by the cliffs again, and then he's struggling with Phil, and there's no extra explanation here for why he did any of this, any other motives, but they're struggling, and then he's like Michael Myers, because there's a couple of times where it looks like Frankie's got him, like, with mortal wounds, you know. First of all, he's already been stabbed in the spine by the aunt, and then on the cliffs, it looks like he's fallen, but he hasn't, and then he's crawling back up again, and then the important thing is that when Frankie gets back on, he sees the charge of the Light Brigade, all of the cops in their torches, and his dad leading them all, and so his dad gets Frankie, kisses him, is just like, oh, my little boy, but Phil is still there on the cliffside, so his dad reaches down to him, like, take my hand, and there is a good tense moment in a way where actually, because of how it was framed, I think that it really could have gone in a few directions for how it would conclude. It seemed as though he might actually let go of him if he did grab him. The way that Phil was looking at the dad, he was like, you think back to that line earlier that I couldn't live with myself if he knew, and that is the conclusion. He doesn't take his hand, he lets himself drop and fall. And we end the film staring at the burning house on the cliffs as snow begins to fall. Roll credits. Really wanted to like it. I really, really did. And the fact is, I actually did. I enjoyed so many of the 80s nostalgia involved in the cinematography and the music design. It was beautiful, atmospheric, creepy, gorgeous, and fun. As I said, it was giving Spielberg and Stephen King. But, the tonal clusterfuck. And that absolutely unnecessary bleak racism subplot that concluded the way it did. There were lots of dangling threads in this movie that I could have forgiven, and it could have been part of its goofy charm, you know, but with that runtime and confused tone, I'm giving it 2 ghost skulls out of 5. Hope you'll join me next time for day 7, where we're going to India for a fantasy horror set in the 1800s. See you then.